So the one-way video interview, what are we going to be looking at? So what I want to do is provide a little bit of a behind the scenes view so you can see what it is like to experience it. We're going to demystify the experience. It's one of those things you get invited to. I was like, has anyone ever been to one of these before? What's it like? What's it going to be like? So I'm going to talk through the different ways that they might be set up and the different types of scenarios that you could face, and just give you some top tips for how to deal with them. So what are they? So essentially, as a candidate, you'll be sat with an online tool, interacting with it on your own. You'll be guided through a structured process on the screen, and a number of predefined questions will be presented to you for you to answer. And you'll record those answers using a webcam. So you'll be recording them using your video. And then you'll hit submit for assessment. So you might find these called AVIs, or asynchronous video interviews. It's a bit of a mouthful. But essentially all that means is that you're doing your interview at a completely different time to when the interviewer is asking the questions and when the interviewer is seeing your responses. So how likely are you to face one of these? Now, I'm certainly seeing them becoming a lot more popular. I'm seeing a lot of people asking about what it's like, hence the reason for wanting to talk to you about this today. And one of the leading software suppliers, HiveView, who provides the software for people to run these within their business, this is just their stat. So this is just one supplier, and there's quite a number of these in the market. So typically these interviews are used for initial screening purposes. HiveView have more than 700 businesses using them, and they've been adopted by a third of Fortune 500 companies. Their platform has supported over 10 million interviews, so that's quite a lot, although some people do use these platforms for quite high volume recruiting for lower skill jobs. So that probably sounds scarier than it is. But you'll see that last stat that there's been a huge increase in demand during the pandemic as people have been looking for alternative ways to conduct their interviews, with face-to-face not being possible. So why do companies like them? The candidates don't tend to like them. So what is it that companies feel it gives them in terms of the benefit? So I just wanted to put this across because I think a lot of people feel they're very impersonal, but I think once I give you these stats, you'll get a feeling for why some people are tempted to use them in their business. So according to Modern Hire, which is another platform provider, their customers typically see a 30% increase in efficiency from using these tools. Companies that use them are seeing a 20% reduction in turnover because they're getting a better quality of hire and they're getting a better match. And this is a really key one, 70% reduction in interview to hire ratio. So the number of interviews needed to bring somebody in. And I've seen a similar 70% stat for the amount of time that some companies are saving. So you can see why some people are considering this, can't you? However, back to the candidate. Now, this lady has obviously been invited to one of these and she's not looking forward to it. How do you feel about them? I mean, it would be interesting to capture this in the chat so I can have a look later. Does the thought of it, is it something that absolutely terrifies you? Is it something you just wouldn't do? You say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm avoiding that. Whatever it takes, I'm not going to do it. And maybe it conflicts with your values. And this is what a lot of people say. They're concerned about a company that has such an impersonal process. And is that really the sort of company you want to work for? Now, they are impersonal. There are ways companies can make them feel slightly more personal. But I've been through a few of these, and I've definitely not found it's always an indicator that once you get past this stage that it feels impersonal. So I get the initial reaction, but it's not necessarily a reflection. I did a poll a few weeks ago, so I thought, let's see what people think. And I said, right, you've been invited to one of these one-way video interviews. Do you accept? So 150 people replied, and these were the results. So as you see, 32%, so nearly a third of people said there was absolutely no way they were going to put themselves through this. A quarter were on the fence, and 43 were like, bring it on, let's do it, I'm up for it. Now, if you consider that as a candidate, that's potentially 50 50% plus of your competition who isn't willing to put themselves through this first stage interview process. So there's an immediate advantage. So got a few reactions here, quotes from people who've been on these or been invited. So the first one here, I've done one, I don't want to do it again, really, I'm in no hurry. Biggest lesson learned, responses can be misinterpreted. So that's something to think about when you're giving your answers in these, for sure. I'd think twice. I'm not sure whether it fits with the values. This person is worried about somebody valuing performance and process over people. This person was one of the group that just wouldn't do it. Said, if they don't want to talk to me in person, I don't want to know. And someone here, I did one last year. It was awful. There was no chance to prepare. Questions weren't shared in advance. I had a minute to answer and it should have taken me much longer than that. However, this one is the one I want to focus on. So this person said it was quite surreal, but they researched it and actually they found it quite enjoyable because they knew a little bit more about what to expect. So that's what I'm aiming to do for you guys this afternoon, is to give you that insight so that you don't have to worry about what it's going to be like. You'll know before you start. So are there any candidate benefits, you might be asking yourself? Well, as we say, there could be a potentially high dropout rate for other applicants. Some companies, because they save time with interviewing this way and doing their initial screening instead of telephone interviews, they might have a broader long list of candidates that they bring in for that first stage. So you might find you have more chance to get on that shortlist. You can do it whenever it's convenient. There's no need to try and find a convenient time when your interviewers are around and during the working day. So if you wanted to do it at 3 in the morning, in the middle of the night, then you're perfectly at ease to do that if that's what you'd like to do and that works best for you. Now, it can be a really quick way to make a great impression. These are normally sort of 15, 20 minutes long maximum. And if you're quite confident with your delivery, then it can be a really good way to make that impression really quickly. Some of them allow you to see the questions in advance, and that's something you rarely get in a normal interview. So that's another potential benefit. And because everybody gets the same set of questions, it should be a fairer process. So let's talk about getting yourself set up. So I've got my little laptop here, and you'll notice, and I think Andrew mentioned this earlier, the camera, know where your camera is and have an arrow pointing to it if you need to. And I'm not going to go through these in any detail. So Andrew covered a lot of this in his session on interviews. It's no different, this type of interview, to if you're being interviewed with somebody else on the other end of the video. So you'll need a well-lit space. Make sure you won't be disturbed. Now, that one probably is a little bit more important. So those of us who are used to kids rushing in or the cat coming and stomping all over the keyboard, in a normal interview, you might be able to say, look, I'm really sorry, do you mind if I just take a minute to sort this out? But if you're in the middle of answering a question and you've only got 1 minute to answer it, you haven't got the luxury of that time to try and extract the cat off your desk. So definitely make sure you won't be disturbed for the time of your interview and you've got those doors shut and no one's going to be coming in. Neutral, uncluttered background, again, same as a normal video interview. Check your camera angle and connectivity. So there's no use having yourself slumped so they can only see from kind of your nose upwards or from your neck down. Dress appropriately. So again, we've had the message that people are generally looking a little bit more casual these days, but have a think about what you're wearing and make sure that it's appropriate. Now, sit comfortably, because going back to that element around the camera angle and connectivity, just make sure you're in a position where you're going to be comfortable during the element where you're recording your response, and be conscious of anything you might fidget with. Avoid having those objects nearby. So I see lots of people who click with their pens or lift pen lids on and off, or just have something nearby to fiddle with. So if you're one of those people, make sure those things are out of reach so you haven't got the temptation. And then have your prep notes, your CV and the job spec to hand. Again, as Andrew mentioned earlier, it's really great having these video interviews. You can have things around you. Like the old Post-its, again, Probably not as many as that. I think you'd find it hard to see your crib notes if you had that many. But the other thing that would be really useful for this type of interview, especially if you're given more time to prepare, is to make sure you've got some paper and pen so that you can be making some notes. So, getting ready for it. What's it going to look like if you're invited to one of these? So somebody might call you first and let you know. Generally, I've found that people are invited by email and text, which adds to that impersonal element sometimes. So this is the sort of email you might get. So you probably can't see all of the text there, but it tells you that you've been selected. That big blue button for starting the interview will take you into the portal for you to record your interview. And underneath, there's just something saying that what you can expect. So in this particular example, it tells you there's going to be 5 questions. It says there's not going to be any practice questions. Some of them will allow you to have a practice before you start recording. The questions are going to be hidden, so they're going to be displayed and the timer's going to come up for you to answer them. You won't find them out in advance. And this one's going to allow you to retake 2 out of the 5 questions that you're being given. So when you're ready, you'd click on that Start Interview button and off you go, and you'll end up on something that looks like this. Obviously, this is one particular tool I've used here to demonstrate. They will all look slightly different. So here you'll see you've got a nice little welcome message and you've got that record video button. Now, don't worry, you're not going to be thrown straight into recording as soon as you click on that. You'll be taken somewhere else, but you need to click there to actually enter the system. Now, most of these tools, if there's anything you need to adjust for accessibility reasons, then that should be there for you to do. And if you do need something in terms of adjustments, worth contacting the company in advance and just letting them know. And then you'll typically get a screen that looks something like this, where they'll check your video, and they normally make this a mandatory step to make sure that the rest of it's going to work properly. So you'd click on that little test video button and it does a test, and you'll see in this instance I've got the great big tick and the little post-it there holding a thumbs up sign, so I'm ready to begin. So this is where it gets interesting. So we hit begin interview and we're ready to record. So here I've got some real life views of what one of these systems looks like when you're in it. Now here you'll see I've not taken my own advice about not having an uncluttered background, so make sure it doesn't look like this. It looks really messy and distracting. But you'll see here it says that once you click the start recording button, that's when they'll present the question to you. And it alerts you to the fact you have 30 seconds to prepare your answer. So this is the point where you have a bit of control, but it is potentially the last time that you do. So when you're ready, you can click start, and you'll see on the bottom you've got a little timeline here which shows that there's going to be 5 questions altogether, and it gives you the amount of time. So question 1, I'm going to have 3 minutes to reply. So they're easing me in gently here. So first question, please walk us through your CV, and you'll see the big green circle with 27. So this is the countdown timer. So it allows you 30 seconds on this particular tool, and that might vary. And this will count down, and you can either wait until it counts down to 0 and you get automatically booted into the recording area, or you can take a little bit of control here and start it now when you're ready. Although I've done the test on this one, I was mumbling a little bit, so you'll see it's been kind to me and it's let me know and asked me to speak a little bit louder. So a lot of the systems will check while you're recording and make sure that you're doing the right thing. And you'll see here, this is the sort of screen you might face if you're allowed to retake and re-record some of your answers. So you'll see it says I've got 2 attempts left, and it has a question button, do I want to retake? Now in this particular instance, I don't think I do. I'm happy with my second answer. But if I just wanted to reassure myself here, you'll see there's a little play icon at the bottom of each picture, and that allows me to go back and play back what I've just recorded so I can be sure which one I want to pick. But in this case, I'm taking recording number 2 and I'm going to hit next. And it's very kind to me. It says, am I sure about this? This is the point of no return. If I select that one, that's the one that's going to be submitted. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea about what it might look like as a candidate. So generally, you'll be finding that you feel like you're being interviewed by yourself because it'll be only you on screen. So how long do you have to prepare an answer? Well, this is a little bit like how long is a piece of string. You could be given unlimited time or it could be restricted. And typically it's restricted from a minimum of 30 seconds, but it might be longer. Again, time to answer might vary from 30 seconds, which is really tight, to a few minutes. But that bit is rarely unlimited. There's normally a timing for that. And there's the option for some of them to re-record, or otherwise they're submitted automatically. And that's something to be aware of. When you're starting to answer, you'll normally see something along the screen which indicates how much time you have left. So keep an eye on that while you're recording, especially if you've still got the most important bit of your answer to come. So get to that really quickly before you lose it, because at the point at which that time finishes, it will automatically stop. And that's it. That's game over for that question. There's no going back unless they let you re-record. Okay, so I've shown you behind the scenes as a candidate. What does it look like for the person who's actually setting these interviews up? So here you'll see a typical screen. So this is where they can type in the question, and this is the question we've just seen. Please walk us through your CV. You see there's some details underneath where you can add a little bit more context if the interviewer wants to do that. And then you'll see that the retake and time limit. So this can be set as the same throughout the interview, or it can be customized for each question. So this one here, it allows 3 retakes, as we just saw, and a 3-minute time limit for response. Now underneath it says make this a video question. So if you're wondering what that's about, and I've actually had one of these, this is where they have the option to make it a little bit more personal for the candidate. So what some companies do is they actually record themselves posing the questions to you. So you see your interviewers. Obviously you don't see them at the same time because they've recorded it and you're just watching the playback, but it can make that feel a little bit more personalized. And then finally, there's the option here for candidates to see the questions before they start, or hidden. And I have to say, in my experience and that of the people I speak to, the hidden option is generally what people have, so that you don't see the questions first, except for that period while you're given that thinking time. So let's talk retakes. Now that particular tool I showed you, there was the option to go back and look at all your answers and decide which recording you wanted to submit. But you might be wondering why I'm showing you a photo booth. I don't know about those of you who use these for your passport photos. And generally you sit there and the first one is presented to you, it takes the picture and you look at it and go, oh, there's a little bit of hair over my face, or I'm blinking. I'm not sure I want that to be on my passport for the next 10 years. Let's have another go. So then that picture comes out and you're not sure about that one either. So you go to the third picture, you think, oh, yeah, let's have another go. But suddenly the photo booth says to you, that's it, that's your last chance. You've got to take that one. We're printing it. And you're too late. So be careful of being too perfectionist with some of these answers. Most companies aren't expecting you to be brilliant on camera. It's more about the content of your answers. So don't try and get them nailed so brilliantly that you run out of time, or you end up having to submit something that you're really not happy with, as this person found. So this was someone who responded to my poll the other week, and this is quite staggering. So this probably should have taken 10, 15 minutes for them to finish the interview. They had 7 questions and they were given unlimited thinking time and they were allowed to re-record. And it took them 3 hours in total for them to be happy with what they were recording and submitting. So you can imagine if you were in a 20-minute telephone interview, there's no way you'd have that luxury of keeping the person on and repeating your answers until you hit 3 hours. So just be careful about having some of that extra time, not to use it too much. So what could you be asked? Well, you could be asked introductory questions like the one we just saw. Tell me about yourself, walk us through your CV. Motivational questions, these are quite typical. So tell us why you want this role. What is it that appeals to you about coming and working for this company? Competency questions, yes, I know these get everywhere. So these will find their way into these interviews as well. You know, the ones where you're asked to give an example of where you've done something in the past. And that is a particularly important one to get right in the time frame. You don't want to be spending all your time setting the context and talking about what you did and not managing to reach the result. You might get strengths-based questions. Now, if that's not a term you're familiar with, these are the questions that I think a lot of my clients tell me that they see as being kind of hitting them out of the blue, slightly curveball. Now, these are the sort of ones where you might be asked, what makes your perfect day? What would your perfect day look like? Or do deadlines motivate or intimidate you? So they're focused more on what you enjoy doing, but they're getting an insight into your personality. You might have questions about your technical skills, and there could be any other type of question. So I've been asked what questions I might have for them. So even though there's nobody on the other end answering them, they've still asked me for those questions. So be aware of that and make sure you've prepared some of those just in case. You also have some where they ask if there's anything else that you would like to put forward in support of your application. So be prepared for that one. But essentially, you could be asked anything that might come up in a normal interview. So make sure you're prepared. So you've recorded it all, you're happy with your answers. What happens once it leaves you? What happens when you hit that submit button? So generally it will go to somebody to review. And this could be the hiring manager themselves. It might be an internal recruiter doing some screening. It might be the agency doing some screening. It might be anybody else that could have an interest. So normally with these tools, the recording doesn't just have the option to be sent to the hiring manager or the administrator. It can be forwarded on elsewhere. So you never know who that might be sent on to. Alternatively, some of these have some built-in AI assessment. And this might be looking at keyword scans. It might be looking at doing some body language or facial expression analysis, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on. It claims to reduce unconscious bias, and it often results in these being auto-scored against those criteria. So Modern Hire, who's a platform provider, did a scientific study, and they showed that these systems had an 89% reliability score compared to humans. Not quite sure what that reliability score relates to exactly, but it does show that people see these have an advantage over the decision-making made by people alone. However, another top tip, don't sit there trying to squeeze in so many buzzwords because you think it might be going through a keyword scan, because you might forget to give a decent answer, you might miss elements out of your answer, and it might appear insincere. So always assume that somebody is going to be taking a look at this. So there is a question about that bias, and I think the tools are becoming a lot more sophisticated. But for those of you who might have seen this in the press a few years ago, Amazon rather famously fell foul of these tools, and they had to stop using one that they'd implemented because it was found to be biased against women. Now, the reasons for that, it was scoring applicants out of 5. But the most important thing was it was programmed based on the CV patterns for the past 10 years. So who'd been applying for these types of roles in the past and who'd been getting through. Most of the applicants for these particular role types were male. So the AI learned from that, and it applied the same sort of rule set when it was making its decisions. So, okay, you've been invited to one of these, and as I say, it's really good to ask as much as you can beforehand so you can be prepared for what you're going to find out. So ask some of these questions. Find out whether they're going to let you re-record, because it's really useful to know. Again, will the questions be available beforehand? So is it something that you're going to be able to see and do a little bit of prep for with the actual questions, or is it going to be a surprise? How long is it going to take to complete? So this goes back to making sure that you're in the right place and you've got enough time set aside to complete this and submit it, because once you hit that button to move forward with your recording, generally you can't stop it. and it wants you to go through to the end. So you need to make sure that you're ready to complete it, like you would if you were doing a psychometric test or verbal reasoning test or something like that. Find out, if you can, how much time is allowed for each question. Now, this is really important. If you're in a face-to-face interview, you're probably used to spending, what, 5, some people probably 10 minutes or more answering particularly competency-based questions. And if you're faced with a 30-second, 45-second limit, really crucial to make sure that you're taking your prime examples and you're practicing them to a range of different time frames, so that if you can't find out how much time is allowed before it, you're prepared. And equally, if you know how much time, you can practice specifically for the amount of time you know you're going to have. And find out what the deadline is. Now, this is an interesting one. Some of them have quite short deadlines. Some of them might have quite a long window. But be careful with the long window, because there might be the scenario where they cut off applications because they find enough people early on. And I've certainly seen that happen. So I'd say complete it as soon as you can. I know it's something you'll probably want to be putting off, but get to it. If you're going to do it, and do it as soon as you can. So last few tips before we move to some Q&A. So research thoroughly. So this is no different to any other interview. You don't know what you're going to be facing. You don't know what you're going to be asked. So do your research on the company. Be prepared to ask those questions around why you want the role, why you want to go and work for them. Check that deadline. Make sure you're not going to miss out by being too late. Practice those responses. So as I said just now, practice them so that you can get them nailed in a really short period of time, especially if you know how long you're going to have. Practice within that time frame. But don't over-rehearse. You don't want it to come over as being too robotic. Get dressed to impress. Mind those interruptions. Speak clearly. So there won't be anybody on the other end saying that they didn't quite hear you properly, or they're not quite sure what you said. So speak really clearly and try and use as unambiguous language as you can, so that you're minimizing the opportunity for something to be misinterpreted when it's viewed at the other end. Make that eye contact with the camera. And this one, really important, smile. And key tip from me here, having been through some of these, is get that smile plastered on your face before the recording starts or you're hitting record, because otherwise your kind of resting face, your preparation face will be on the screen, and then the interviewer will see that switch, that momentary switch from resting face to smiling. I'm engaging with my interviewer face, and it looks really strange. So make sure you've got that smile ready before you go in. Okay, so I do practice runs for these. I have my own video tool, the one that you saw on the screen. So if that's something you'd be interested in booking a mock one-way interview, then this is how you can find me. And Neil has these details as well. And I can be found on LinkedIn. So Neil, back to you for some Q&A.
Fantastic. No, that was really insightful. I love that there's so much emphasis put on video interviews now, because, you know, even a year ago it was alien to most people, right? It was just this thing where, you know, suddenly we now all have to have this skill to interview with someone that we're not next to. It's harder to read sort of body language. It's harder to it's a much different process. And I say this to people that I coach as well. I say it's the most unnatural thing in the world to sit there and look at 3 people on a screen. And if you say the wrong thing, then they might not pay you some money. Like it's
here, I mean, you're not even seeing 3 people. You're just seeing yourself. It's like you're being interviewed by yourself, and that is really weird. So practicing via Zoom can be, if you've got Zoom or Teams, open up an empty Zoom meeting and get used to practicing your answers in front of your own face. That really helps.
Sometimes I just tab out if I'm talking to people. If there's sort of, the first time I ever did a large group session, I wasn't looking. I was just tabbed out, because it's still recording you, and what you really need to focus on is your own body language more than anything else, right? Yeah. You could sit there and get nervous looking at, oh, no, did he touch his ear for the wrong reason? But realistically, you just need to focus on how you come across, because that's who they're all looking at. And it's one of the most anxiety-filled things in the world, the video interview. But really, really good points. We've actually had quite a few questions come through, so I'll just jump into those, if that's okay. Okay, so let's start off with Veronica. I was invited to a video interview following an initial phone screen. Never did one, but was excited. The HR insisted they emailed me a link, 2 calls, 5 emails later, over and over a 2-week period. Still no link received. Checked spam regularly. I emailed, thanked her for her perseverance, and just gave up. What in your experience happened? Have you heard of this before? What should I do if it happens again?
I've not heard of that before. I mean, normally, it's been a little while since I've had one of these, but generally I found I've had a text to let me know about it, and I've had an email. So see whether there's a text option. But I mean, that's really sad, actually, Veronica. I don't see that should have been for you to give up on. I think they should have given you an alternative in that scenario. So I'm really sorry about that. I've not come across that before. So I would push for an alternative if that happens again.
I completely agree. I think it's it's a shocking one, to be honest. It's not one that I've come across often, if ever. I don't think so. I think it depends. The other issue and challenge that we're facing with this is there's so many different platforms people are using.
Yes.
I had one person that I was going through that had a video interview invite from Blue Jeans, which apparently is a video interviewing platform. And they said, well, what? I've never heard of it. How do I know that my mic and stuff is going to work? And in that situation, what I said to the gentleman was, go and find a friend, set up a free account and try it. If you come across these technologies that you've never used before, just go practice it. Most of them give out free accounts, right? Yes. And I say that to me, if anyone ever comes across that who's listening now and they want me to go and get a free account through my business or whatever, if that's easier, then I'm always happy to do those sort of mock interviews. But yeah, sorry, Veronica, I'm sorry we couldn't be more help on that one. But it's we've not heard of it happening before. But yeah, it's a difficult one.
On that note, though, I mean, I know you said that one came through as Blue Jeans. Sometimes they come through and you can't see in the invite what the tool is. But normally, if you click on it, you can see in the URL there'll be a clue as to the tool that's being used. So definitely go and have a look on that company's website and see if you get a little bit of an idea as to how that works.
Yeah, really good idea. So we've got one from Joanna saying, hiya, are the stats of why companies like AVI? The stats come from modernhire.com, which sells AVI. Are there alternative sources without a commercial bias? Only wondering because I've not been asked to do one and believe I would decline for all the reasons given in the chat. But if it is genuinely a good thing for the hire, then I might reconsider. Thanks.
Well, I mean, I don't think most people would do this for anything other than a commercial reason. Generally, I'm sure that those were particular to the clients for that particular supplier. So I'm sure there are others who publish some stats. I think the one I found said 70% reduction interview to hire ratio. Another company said it was 70% reduction in time spent. So yeah, they're all going to be different, but they're still quite hard hitting numbers. It depends, doesn't it? The view that they're impersonal and maybe they don't fit with your values. That's a battle I think you need to have in your own head. It's whether you think the company is worth it and the role is worth it, that you want to go through this hurdle, and just see whether any concerns you might have of values are something you can address later on in the final stages of the interview. So I wouldn't necessarily rule it out just because of that value clash.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, fantastic. Hopefully that's been helpful. Joanna, another one from Joanna. What is the future for AVIs? Most of the chat is about how much the interviewees hate them. Is there a tipping point where AVIs will take over? Good question.
Yeah, that is a really good question, and that's probably a hard one to answer. I mean, I think having seen the stats that they had a 24% increase last year, it's been a relatively slow increase up until then. I suppose some people will have used them specifically because of the challenge that they faced during the pandemic, that they've not been able to bring people in. It's like everything, isn't it? The more these things are out there, the more people use them, the more people hear about them, the more popular they become. As you saw, there were some quite hard-hitting stats for why a company might want to use them. And in terms of availability and scheduling, it's so much easier for people to whack out a link and you go and log in when you're free, rather than, I'm sure we've all sat here and experienced the issues of dealing with an internal recruiter and everybody trying to work out when the interviewers are free and when you can book a slot and who's going to be around. So it does have that benefit. Who knows? I can see them becoming more popular. I can't see them going away anytime soon.
Yeah, it sounds like, I'm just going through the questions now, it sounds like there's some real concerns from people around, the ethical side of it. So we've got one here from Francis. Great tips from Sarah. Do appreciate we all need to jump through hoops when interviewing. But I think there's a valid ethical concern here in terms of AVIs and employer recruiter power plays.
Yeah, I think there is. It's not something that I've enjoyed when I've had to do them. It's not something that sits comfortably with me. But I think, as I said, I went through one where the interviewers had actually recorded their questions, and that actually felt so much more personal. And it was a small company. It was an SME of about 40 staff, I think. And when I got through to the next round, they were absolutely lovely. And I think they put it in place, one, because it was easy for them in terms of scheduling, but also they thought it would be a benefit for the people coming in, that they didn't have to travel to their office and they could just pick 15 minutes and have a go. So, yeah, I think it depends how you want to look at it. We've had so many sessions on mindset today. I suppose it's how you want to spin it for yourself, isn't it, really?
Yeah, that we've had some great sessions on mindset, but you're right. It is, if it's inevitable, then it's something that it's another skill you have to learn, right? The way I look at it is, you have to learn the ability to communicate effectively in person. We can't do that right now. So a skill that you have to learn for the sake of your job search and for the sake of what you're doing and trying to achieve. Think about it like that. It's just another skill I need to learn. It's another arrow to my bow. It's something that I need to improve on actively and take an active role in thinking of it as a particular skill set that I need to improve.
Yeah, and I think equipping yourself with the knowledge. I mean, I told you some questions to ask before you go into one of these. And the first time I was invited to one, I didn't even think to ask questions. It was just a gut reaction. Oh my word, I'm not sure what this is going to be like. And I'll just press the button and see how it works. But why not take a bit more control back and find out? At least ask if you can.
Okay, yeah, I agree. There's some great questions coming up here, actually. One from Tim. I want to know the answer to this as well. Does the company know how long it took you to answer the questions beyond the time limit? Apart from the time limit?
No, I don't think they do. Looking at the tool that I use, all I see is the actual submission. So if somebody re-recorded 3 times, I don't get to see any of the show reel that got left on the cutting room floor, if you like. I just see what their end submission was. So I don't think they do. So that lady that spent 3 hours submitting her interview, I don't know that they would have seen that. There might be something behind the scenes. I haven't got the full reporting suite with my tool, so who knows? But I'm not sure.
Do they know how many attempts you've taken?
Well, that didn't show up for me either.
I've always wondered that, if they know if you did it in 1 or you took 38 attempts, which if, people that know me when I'm recording videos, sometimes that takes 150 takes to get a 2-minute video done. So
I'd say, I suppose, that one, because a lot of this is about speed, is someone going to be rooting around in the stats behind the scenes to see whether that was the case? Probably not. And if they've given you the option to re-record, it's that they're being kind to you and they want to give you that opportunity. So I'd say they're going to be interested in the final one, and they're not going to care whether you've actually used all the attempts they gave you. I don't think that's part of the test.
No, I think you're right. I hope that's answered your question, Tim. Are all role types and seniority levels in scope for AVI? That's from Sanjay.
I mean, I've not seen them used at a really high level, but I've seen them used at middle manager, senior manager roles. I think they started off, a lot of them became popular in the States, and I don't know if someone can endorse or contradict me on this, but I think a lot of them were used for high volume, low skilled roles so that you could get a view quite quickly from a large number of candidates. But I've certainly seen them up to senior manager level.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. That's where it started from, and for the sake of volume, is where my understanding as well. We've got some great questions. If you're asking a question, please use the ask a question function. It's much easier, but we do have some on the side that I'll get to now. So John said, do you have a format to follow in doing these interview answers?
Well, I mean, the format I would say for your competency-based answers, go for your typical STAR format. But really be careful with that, because the mistake a lot of people make in a face-to-face interview is that they spend an awful lot of time setting the scene and the context of the example. And if you're doing that in one of these, especially if you've only got 45 seconds, that is so tight. Make sure that you are getting to the crux of the actions that you took and the result that you achieved before you get cut off, because these things are brutal. You might be just about to get to the really quick key point and you hit your 2-minute limit and boom, that's it. Next question's being fired at you. So that's the main structure I'd use for that. I like any interview, I suppose, be prepared for the type of questions that you might have, the range of questions. And as I said in the presentation, just practice them. If you can find out how you've got, that's brilliant, because you can practice solely within that time limit. If you don't know that, then I would definitely practice to a range of them. Think of them being as tight as 30, 45 seconds if you can, and be as succinct as possible.
Is there standardization around that, or any reasoning between doing different lengths?
No, I mean, it's interesting that most of the ones I've been through have been 2 or 3 minutes, but I've heard of people having 30, 45 seconds to answer their questions. I think that's brutal. I don't know how you get an answer that's meaningful in that amount of time. So no, I've not seen any standard. Really haven't.
Yeah, that's interesting. Look, I think it's clearly a really divisive issue. We've had a lot of really interesting questions here, and it's something that if it is going to become the norm, and it seems like in certain industries it certainly already has, then it is just going to become a skill that you need to learn.
Yes.
And it's going to be something that you're going to need to have, regardless of whether you want to or not. But I mean, if you look at it in sort of the example that I gave before, if it was a skill to learn how to communicate effectively in person in an interview, right? There was, workshops on that.
Absolutely.
Ever since the interviews existed, there's been workshops on how to effectively communicate in person. And it's only because this is COVID and everything else that's happened has forced us to play this hand where companies are utilizing this technology. But yeah, just look at it in a positive way. It's a new skill that I have to learn, and go about it like that. Fantastic. How can people find you, Sarah, if they want to?
So like many people have said on here, I live on LinkedIn pretty much. So you can find me on there under my name. I have got the link in my presentation. I'm happy to send the slides out if people want to see those afterwards. And I think you've got all our contact details, haven't you, on the website, Neil?
All the contact details for every person who's speaking today will be on the website. Yeah, absolutely. So they're on. If you scroll down to the bottom after all the times, then it's that's got every person. It's got the little blurb about that I read at the beginning, and also followed by everyone's details that's giving me their details. So yeah, if you need to find any of them, that's an easy way. So that's www.easterjobhunt.com.
I'll put my LinkedIn in the chat. I'll go and do that now.
Brilliant. Yeah, fantastic. Do that. Well, brilliant. Is there any last words you want to leave everyone with?
I think it was really interesting seeing the results of the poll. I was quite staggered by how few people were just going to go for it if they were invited to one of these. So unless you really feel very strongly about that kind of ethical values element, I'd say go for it. You've got nothing to lose, because if you take yourself out the running, you're definitely not going to get the job. So why not give it a go?
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, look, thank you so much for your time, Sarah. It was really, really insightful, and I didn't think it would be that divisive. So it was actually really entertaining to watch. But it's so interesting to see how against it people are. And it's obviously going to be a big issue moving forward. But thank you so much for your time. Really, really insightful. Thank you everyone for your questions.